The Whispering Mountain by Joan Aiken, Chapter 12. Owen walked slowly through the series of entrance chambers to the large cavern which contained the feature from which Devil's Leap took its name. As he advanced, the whisper of Fig Hat Ben became more and more distinct. The whole place seemed full of a soft, throbbing mutter. It was hardly a sound so much as a shiver in the air about him. The cave was illuminated by gas flambeaux, which threw a greenish but clear light. Owen therefore extinguished the sixpenny taper he had caught up from the admission table and gazed about him with interest. The floor in this big cave was not flat, but bowl-shaped. The cave was, in fact, a huge round hole inside the mountain, as if it had been left by a bubble which had swelled and then burst. There were numerous entrances from which flights of steps had been cut, winding round the circular sides and down to the bottom. Here, like the plug-hole to a basin, yawned a dark, circular opening, perhaps 30 feet across, and of an unknown depth. Some people said that it descended to the very roots of the mountain, others that it was bottomless. Up this gigantic shaft, borne on a current of air, cloudy wreaths of steam perpetually rose. They broke and changed and took strange forms like the clouds in a stormy sky. Owen saw the shapes of horses and chariots, dragons and dolphins forming and dissolving silently in the vault of the cavern above him. Slowly and with caution he descended one of the winding flights of steps. He felt like a fly crawling over the inside of a pudding bowl. Sounds reverberated strangely in the huge place, and he kept looking back, thinking there was somebody behind him, when it was only the echoes of his own feet clattering on the rock. At length he reached the rim of the great wall. To prevent sightseers from falling in, the Nant Aggerdow Town Council had fenced it round with a rope slung between stout posts. At one point these crossed a spur or tongue of rock, about 4 feet wide at the base and 8 feet long, which extended outwards from the side of the well, like some fearsome diving board. Standing near this spur, Owen looked downward into the dim, vapor-filled depths below. At first, the height made him dizzy, and he was obliged to close his eyes. Presently, to his astonishment, he began to think that he could hear music, or at any rate a series of half-musical sounds. Long, wavering, twanging notes to begin with. He thought he must be imagining the sounds, but they grew clearer, as if they moved toward him. Then he began to think they were coming from the depths of the well, unlikely though this seemed. Puzzled, wondering if the sounds could be another peculiar effect of the cave's circular shape, he wiped his glasses and stared down, keeping a firm grasp of the rope. By degrees his eyes became accustomed to the murky dimness below, and he saw that 20 feet down, directly opposite him, another spur of rock protruded from the side of the shaft. He remembered then a tale which Erebus had once told him. A legend of how the devil had stolen the candlesticks from Nant Aggerdow Church, was pursued by St. Enadog, and jumped from one spur of rock to the other, in his haste letting fall the candlesticks, which the saint skilfully caught in mid-air. Owen shivered as he imagined leaping over that fearful depth from one narrow prong of rock to the other. Surely no one but the devil would attempt such a feat. Then, to his utter astonishment, he perceived something move on the lower spur, something that seemed alive. Hardly able to believe that he was not dreaming, he saw a tiny gray figure advance through coiling wreaths of mist to the very tip of the spur and stand there, apparently quite regardless of the gulf below. Moreover, Owen now realized the music was proceeding from this figure, if indeed the melancholy noise could be called music. After a while, a harsh, grating voice began to sing, at first in some incomprehensible language. Then suddenly Owen found that he could distinguish words, and presently whole phrases, though the accent was odd and unfamiliar. All I need is a harp for my contented talkative harp, a sociable harp, a harp of my own. One time I had a harp, but it is gone. In an hour of deep despair, which I repent because its song was harsh, I broke it on a stone. I cast it into the dark, I heard it fall, and weeping went for many days alone. Having murdered my harp, unhappy Abbey Paul. But now from the dark another harp is sent. I have set new strings, and will teach them to sing a new song excellent, a new song meant for Abbey Paul alone, sweeter than all, second to none, a talkative harp, sure and tender is your tone, O happy Abbey Paul. All I need is a harp for my content. Owen listened with great surprise to this wild and uncouth chant, which seemed to float up to him out of the rocky hollow on waves of mist. Although the singer professed great love for his harp and satisfaction with it, in fact it seemed to Owen that he treated it very carelessly, even roughly, thumping and thwacking it, shaking it, almost tearing it apart. When, due to his clumsy handling, it gave out a particularly dissonant sound, he flew into a positive passion and several times looked to be on the point of hurling it down the well, only just managing to restrain himself at the last moment. Anxious to view the harp at closer quarters, Owen resolved to try and find some means of coming nearer to the player. Plainly, it was necessary to be careful. If, as appeared probable from his song, Abipol had already flung one harp away, there was too much danger of his repeating this deed to take any liberties with him. There were several openings in the sloping wall behind Owen. He chose the one nearest him and followed the winding passage into which it led, guided by the strains of Abipol's curious music, which were audible even here. When the passage divided, he took the more downward course, and, after some 5 minutes of groping in the dark, he emerged on a kind of natural terrace which encircled the great vertical shaft at the level of the lower spur. Abipol's song could be heard much more clearly here, though, on account of the windings of the passage Owen had followed, he was almost directly opposite on the far side of the wall. Owen, although he took care to keep himself concealed in shadow, now had a fairly good view of this strange little character, for the greenish light filtered down the well from above and illuminated the spur of rock on which he stood. He was extremely short, not much over 3'6". His garments were indescribably tattered and disorderly, appeared to be made of some gray fur. From under his gray fur cap a mass of wild, dark, unkempt locks protruded. His horny feet were bare, and his face, gnarled and withered as an old elm root, suggested that he must be a great age, probably well over 80. The harp he held contrasted strangely with his appearance, for it was fully strung, brilliant gold, and shining. It might have just left the maker's hands, yet its appearance was strangely familiar. Owen had dusted the harp of Teratu many times in the Pennygaff Museum, that he felt almost certain he was not mistaken. There, in the utmost peril, as it seemed, of being dashed to destruction at any moment by its impatient player, was the lost treasure. He ought to be able to play the harp better at his age, Owen thought, as the particularly discordant and jangling clump of notes came staggering through the air, and Abipol, in a perfect frenzy of frustration, stamped his foot furiously on the rock, and then hopped up and down in agony. His position, capering about on the very edge of the abyss, seemed extraordinarily perilous. Several times Owen held his breath in terror as he seemed bound to fall, but it was plain that he must be amazingly sure-footed and muscular, for although he frequently leaned right over the edge, he always drew back without the slightest trouble, and continued singing and playing with unabated energy. Part of his difficulty in playing, Owen realized, came from the unusual shortness of his arms and the fact that the harp, though not a large one, was far too big for him. His left arm could not reach all the way across the strings unless he turned the instrument sideways on, and then, of course, his right hand could hardly reach the strings at all. And the harp? Creeping closer still, Owen felt his hope grow to a certainty. He recognized the leaves and fruit ornamenting the frame, and the strange, beautiful, upward-staring face carved at the tip of the bowl. Little Abipol had certainly made a magnificent success of cleaning and repairing the formerly stringless, dirty, dilapidated instrument. It seemed sad that his skill as a player lagged so far behind. Abipol had launched into a new chant. "Sing flat, not sharp, you disobedient harp. Why can't you do as you are told, you miserable bit of gold?" Twang went the strings as he struck them, a vicious blow screeching with rage at the resulting jangle. "Poot me," whispered a voice from somewhere to Owen's left. "What a rumpus the little cove do make. Ain't he reekful, eh, Bilk?" "Regardless, a regular rug-headed little Abram," agreed another voice. Right tricksy we'll need to be to get the Bandor away from him, so frampled he is. If we aren't right sprag, he'll toss us down old Bollyboo's hole afore we can get it off him. Owen nearly fainted with astonishment and dismay at the sound of those two voices, which he had thought silenced forever. Prigman and Bilk! But how in the world did they come to be here in the cave? Had they escaped from an awful death in the buried cottage? Wanted to bail of luck, though, chancing on the little cullion down in these here voltages, eh, Bilk? Who'd have reckoned, when that there doddering hillside came down on the roof, that the floor'd give way and we'd fall through on a pantoflaise like this, live and skipping, and find the little queer bird as must have prigged our Bandor. Look how he's cleaned it up, too, and new catlings need us ninepence. Naffy is new, I dare say old Stigmatical will fork over twice the lure for it now. You still reckon on handing it over, then? Burn my gallysops, yes! I've no fancy to pass the rest of my days without any fambles or stamps. Ask me, his lordship, his own brother, is horny himself. No matter where we hugged, he'd search us out in the end. I reckon trying to play him false was a mug's game. It was your notion, Bilk said sourly. Quit brabbling! All we need to do now is get the Tinkerplunk away from little Caliban there, and we're up to our gorges in velvet. Now you slide round that away, and then let out a shout to startle him. I'll stand yonder to cut him off when he scampers. Agreed? Aye. Let's get at him. Don't you dare! Owen bawled, as loud as he could. You leave him alone! Keep your hands off that harp! He could not endure the thought of Bilk and Prigman getting possession of the harp for a second time. Rather than that, it would be far better for Aberpal to keep it. At least he had put it to rights, and appeared to love it in his peppery way. A silence of utter astonishment followed Owen's shout. Then Bilk muttered, Trine me! It's the young bumblecock! How in Mandrake's name did he get here? Never mind him, said Prigman urgently. Get after t'other one. Quick, you monument! For Aberpal, alarmed by the voices, had not paused an instant, but with one agile goat-like bound had quitted his pinnacle of rock and vanished into a cranny behind him. Prigman, who was nearest, gave chase. Bilk followed Prigman, and Owen brought up the rear at top speed, running blind in the dark, feeling his way along the rock walls with his hands. It was a frantic, headlong scramble. Owen was not even sure whether Aberpal had not already given his pursuers the slip and gone off into some undetectable crevice, but if not, Owen was determined to help fight off the thieves at whatever cost. And we will pause there.